Tarocchi del Mantegna is a set of 50 allegorical engravings divided into 5 groups of 10 representing an image of the cosmos, whose author is unknown. The Libellus de Figura Mundi is a work by Nicholas of Cusa that is considered lost. Its title indicates that it dealt with the representation of the cosmos, a central theme in Cusan thought. Cusa will be recognized by Giordano Bruno and subsequent philosophical tradition as the first to develop the idea of an infinite dynamic universe without a fixed center. Both the Taroki and the Figura Mundi were created in Italy during the same period. Cusa describes his Figura Mundi as a short book. Some copies of the Taroki were bound precisely as short books. In the field of iconology, it has been proposed that the 5 series reflect the medieval cosmological model, as well as an ascending hierarchical ladder that evokes the mystical ladder of John Climacus and the structure of Dante's Divine Comedy. This study demonstrates for the first time that, while the Taroki incorporates medieval hierarchies, numerous elements transcend them, clearly revealing the infinite dynamic universe without a fixed center that Nicholas of Cusa proposed. 3 of the 5 series present a hierarchical order. Series A, whose allegories represent the principles of the celestial macrocosm. Series E, which depicts social hierarchies as the terrestrial microcosm. And Series C, where the liberal arts and disciplines that lead to knowledge appear. I call these 3 groups of 10 linear modal series, insofar as they represent modes of being organized according to a hierarchical order. In contrast, the other 2 series do not properly show a hierarchy, but rather a circular structure. The first and last allegory of each series are conceptually linked, both functioning as beginning and end simultaneously. Cusa, unlike the ascending ladder of John Climacus and Dante, proposes a perfect circulation, where the ascent is not linear but cyclical. This circularity eliminates the rigid hierarchical distinction between levels and unifies beginning and end in a continuous movement where each term contains its opposite. This is the foundation of his doctrine of concordances and the coincidence of opposites. For example, Series D of the Muses and Apollo shows at the beginning of the numerical sequence Calliope, considered the supreme muse for her excellent voice, and at the end of the series appears Apollo as the luminous and epistemological principle of the Muses. Both Apollo and Calliope function in this iconographic program as source and culmination of light, harmony, and knowledge. The end coincides with the beginning. When the allegories are arranged in circular disposition, extraordinary concordances emerge where opposites unite. This explains why the Muses follow the inverse order, to that established by Fulgentius in his fable of the 9 Muses. The presence of celestial spheres and musical instruments in their representations links them to the harmony of the universe and the Pythagorean music of the spheres, taken up by the Platonic tradition that Cusa knew deeply. This circularity also operates in the complete set of 50 allegories. The first and last simultaneously represent beginning and end from complementary perspectives. The numbering suggests a process of spiritual ascent from allegory number 1, the miserable, to 50, which represents the first cause, an Aristotelian concept that Christian scholasticism identifies with God. In contrast, the letters of the series suggest a descent through the 5 cosmological levels, from the celestial spheres, Series A, to the terrestrial plane, Series E, Ascent and descent coexist in the same system. This circular dynamic reflects two fundamental concepts of Cusan philosophy: concordantia, the proportional harmony among diverse elements, and coincidentia oppositorum, the unity of opposites at a higher level of understanding. For Cusa, at the level of the absolute, all oppositions coincide. The Taroki seems designed to visually represent this philosophical doctrine, showing how maximum and minimum, beginning and end, ascent and descent are not contradictions but complementary aspects of the same reality. The structure of this dynamic cosmos also presents a vertical order that marks the ascent through its levels by leaps of 10 by 10. When the 50 allegories are arranged according to their number and series, two vertical lines emerge following these decimal intervals. The first in the third position, with allegories linked to Venus; the second in the 10th position, with allegories that unify and conceptually integrate the 9 preceding allegories in each series. These vertical lines can be called ascensional denaries, structures that articulate spiritual ascent through decades, resonating with a Pythagorean tradition of the decade as a perfect number. The movement between microcosm and macrocosm does not follow solely vertical or horizontal linear trajectories, but also analogical transversal paths that traverse the represented levels. In this way, a multiplicity of combinatorial concordances is generated that link the diverse levels of the cosmos. Around the time of his Figura Mundi, between 1462 and 1463, Nicholas of Cusa described in his work De Ludo Globi a game of wisdom that he himself invented. In this game, Cusa refers to a ball that represents human temporal and corporeal experience, whose symbolic movement is propelled by the soul. The trajectory of the ball is not linear, but can follow a multiplicity of different paths depending on the intellectual and corporeal capacities of each player who throws the ball, generating innumerable variables and possibilities. This is exactly the same logic that operates in the Taroki, which shows a great diversity of paths that connect the levels of the cosmos according to our capacities and our starting point in the terrestrial sphere. It is an instrument of wisdom, like the game that Cusa describes. How do we avoid pareidolia? The 5 series of the Taroki, the specific sequence of their allegories, and their symbolic mathematics converge in a cosmological mathematical system coherent with Cusan philosophy and 15th century iconography. This convergence of multiple independent levels of analysis significantly reduces the probability that the identified patterns are products of pareidolia or subjective projection. The possible combinations among these 50 allegories reach astronomical figures. However, among these millions of possibilities, only a specific fraction produces significant symbolic networks. These significant concordances are not the product of chance, but of a deliberate combinatorics that can be identified through 5 levels of concordances among these allegories: visual, conceptual, analogical, onomastic, and numerical. The simultaneous existence of these 5 levels demonstrates an extraordinarily sophisticated intentional design. Visual concordances manifest in specific iconographic elements. The king, as terrestrial manifestation of Mars, replicates the same bodily posture of the warrior who represents the celestial body. Both look frontward, flex one hand at waist height, hold their attribute of power in the other hand, and present a similar disposition of the feet. In the case of Jupiter and the Emperor, both direct their gaze downward, wear an imperial crown, and the eagle appears as the bird consecrated to this celestial body. The muses associated with these celestial bodies since Martianus Capella are Erato for Mars and Euterpe for Jupiter. Therefore, at the feet of both muses appears a sphere that refers to the celestial spheres, establishing the cosmological connection between the human plane and the celestial. Conceptual concordances find justification in the literature and philosophy available in the mid-15th century, especially in the Platonic and Hermetic tradition. Analogical, numerical, and onomastic concordances are also present. The numerical order of the allegories produces a circularity coherent with the visual, conceptual, analogical, and anagrammatic narrative. The king as strategist who regulates the bonds in his kingdom descends through Erato to Mars, principle of fortitude and victory. From Mars he elevates his qualities toward Jupiter, principle of expansion, harmonic order, experience, and broad vision of things. Once linked to the power of Jupiter, the pleasure of learning descends through Euterpe to manifest as emperor in the human sphere. Thus the cycle closes and restarts. A king cannot automatically become an emperor. He requires a process that links him to the sphere of Jupiter before assuming that role. Not all kings manage to be emperors. Onomastic concordances can be identified in this group by the shared letters in the names of the allegories, a phenomenon that is only possible through the deliberate combination of Latin and Venetian. The emperor constitutes a point of convergence and synthesis. In his lower facet he converges with the king, Erato and Mars, in his upper facet with Euterpe and Jupiter. The emperor is considered son of both Mars and Jupiter, integrating the qualities of both planets, which is reflected in the anagrammatic structure of his name. With the 9 letters of this 9th allegory, the names of the king, Erato, and Mars can be formed entirely, but we can also extract a vowel and the consonantal structure of Euterpe and Jupiter. If the names had been written only in Latin, these anagrams could not be formed, nor if they had been written only in Venetian. The intentional mixture of learned language and vernacular language constitutes in itself a Cusan concordance. Latin represents the academic, formal, and sacred realm, Venetian the everyday and popular realm. Their union reflects the coincidence of the cultured and the vulgar, the eternal and the temporal. Beyond the poetic and philosophical meaning of these anagrams in relation to the allegorical narrative, the deliberate combination of Latin and Venetian in the context of the 15th century could indicate something more: a complex system of encipherment. Since the 13th century, Roger Bacon mentioned that one of the recognized techniques for enciphering messages was precisely combining different alphabets and languages. In 1467, Leon Battista Alberti wrote De Componendis Cifris, where he describes various methods of encipherment and notes that the use of unusual characters, alterations in a text, can indicate that it is an enciphered writing. In the Taroki, we find precisely these cipher indicators described by Bacon and Alberti, both authors known to Nicholas of Cusa. How can we determine that these are cryptographic elements and not simple errors or visual ornaments? Each and every one of these indicators appears systematically throughout the Taroki following patterns coherent with Cusan philosophy and biographical details of Nicholas of Cusa. From specific ruptures of the cosmological structure to calculated linguistic alterations, each element responds to a deliberate cryptographic logic. The following example of the mercurial allegories illustrates the sophistication of this system. In the Platonic and Hermetic tradition that goes back to ancient Egypt, Thoth, called Hermes Trismegistus by the Greeks and Mercury by the Romans, is considered a principle of wisdom in which we all participate in different degrees. He is the father of the sciences and liberal arts as well as the inventor of writing, language, and games. Philosophers, diplomats, jurists, and inventors of games like Nicholas of Cusa could fully identify with the figure of Mercury. Cusa himself acknowledges the importance of Mercury in some of his writings. In 4 allegories linked to Mercury, the phonetic root mi, mir that repeats in their names was identified. The selection of 2 mercurial children who share this phonetic root, Fameo and Mercedante, is deliberate, considering that there are many other mercurial activities. Likewise, Melpomene, with her double root mi, fully identifies with Mercury in this iconographic program, understood as muse of deep reflection and with a mediating function. In De Componendis Cifris, Leon Battista Alberti describes a method of extracting letters from a syllable or word that repeats following a pattern. The syllable or key is omitted, and only the letters immediately before and after the root are taken, which, when rearranged, reveal a hidden message. Applying this method to the mercurial allegories of the Taroki, we obtain the following result. From Fameo, we extract the letters A and I. From Mercadante, we take the C. From Melpomene, with double root mi, we extract L, O, and N. And from Mercurio, we take the C. When rearranging these 7 extracted letters, the only coherent word that can be formed in the context of 15th century Europe is Nicolasi. Could this be an extraordinary coincidence? Mathematics says no. Through 500,000 Monte Carlo simulations and deterministic exhaustive enumeration, it was calculated that the probability of this pattern occurring by chance is only 0.000433%. That is one possibility in 230,300 possible combinations in the Taroki. No other name in the context of that era can be formed using this method. Not Lazzarelli, not Bessarion, not Alberti, not Mantegna, only Nicolasi. The hypothesis of coincidence becomes even more untenable considering that only in these 4 mercurial allegories do 2 inverted N letters appear, one in Mercadante and another in Melpomene. For Cusa, the N has a symbolic meaning related to beginnings and endings, as well as being the initial of his own name. These allegories seem to represent key aspects of Nicholas's life. The servant or fameo as cardinal in the service of Christianity, the merchant as diplomat and negotiator, Melpomene as the philosopher who meditates deeply, and Mercury as principle of wisdom, inventor of concepts and games. Something that draws particular attention is that the merchant has the clothing of a jurist, and his face, like the other three characters, shows notable similarity to the known portraits of Nicholas of Cusa, who studied canon law in Padua between 1417 and 1423. But this is only the beginning. The Taroki conceals a vast amount of philosophical messages, cosmological teachings, and enciphered wisdom. It is a system that anticipates the modern conception of the infinite and dynamic universe. It is not merely art, it is an enciphered philosophical text, an image of the cosmos designed by one of the most brilliant minds of the Renaissance, an enigma more than 560 years old, finally deciphered.